Alrighty. So good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this affordable housing event titled Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Housing. My name is Krista Gladney. I'm the Affordable Housing and Development Facilitator with the City of St. John's, and I'll be guiding you through our morning together. Before we get started with our event, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, of which the City of St. John's is the capital city, as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk. Today, these lands are home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples, and we would like to acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Mi'kmaq, Innu, Inuit, and Southern Inuit of this province. So today's event is part of a series of events that are planned around National Housing Day. Since 1998, municipalities and other organizations across the nation have recognized National Housing Day on November 22nd. This day and week recognize that housing is a basic human right. It's a sound public investment that contributes to resident well-being, the economy, and it's a foundation for a safe, prosperous, and healthy community. So we're pleased to co-host this event today with End Homelessness St. John's, and we'd certainly like to extend a big thank you out to our presenters. So as well, welcome to Councillor Ophelia Ravencroft and the Honorable John Abbott that have joined us here today, as well as our presenters, Joby Fleming, Taylor Castle, Craig Reed, and Doug Posson will be giving some welcomes as well. Thanks to all of our partners from the community, government, and private industry that have made time for this event today as well. So our agenda for today will be a welcome from Councillor Ophelia Ravencroft and Doug Posson, Executive Director of End Homelessness St. John's. Empower will be providing a presentation on their experience of equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing. And then we'll have a presentation from Craig Reed about the new Accessibility Act and Universal Design, a winning solution for everyone. We'll flow in then into a group discussion, and we'll have an update on provincial initiatives from the Honorable John Abbott as well. And I will close us out for the morning. So let's get started. So to welcome you to the event, we have opening remarks from Councillor Ophelia Ravencroft, our new housing lead with the City of St. John's, and then followed by Doug Posson, the Executive Director of End Homelessness St. John's. Councillor Ravencroft.
Good Lord. Okay, this is the first semi-organized presentation I've had to do in a couple of minutes, so I hope I'm stringing it together well. And can everybody hear me okay from here? Grant. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody to this National Housing Day virtual forum, which we're really pleased to co-host with End Homelessness St. John's. And as Krista said, glad to recognize that this event, is in recognition of the fact that having a safe and secure home is a basic human right and a key pathway out of poverty. This is the second of these we on Council are recognizing during a pandemic, which has highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities in the housing and social sector in St. John's and across Canada. I've experienced it in my personal life. I've experienced it with so many close to me, and I know that reality all too well. But regardless of the challenges presented, I feel that these sectors have done a great job in showing their commitment to serving the most vulnerable residents in our city, which is exactly what we need to be doing. I want to take the opportunity to recognize everyone here who's working to ensure the right to housing becomes a reality for everyone. We know there's a lot left to be done, but we can make it happen. And I also want to specifically thank all of our partners here and want to reaffirm our commitment to keeping those partnerships strong, particularly our Affordable Housing Working Group for all their support and guidance in implementing the city's affordable housing strategy, and the many other people and organizations, government and private sector partners who believe in equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing. And at this point, I'd be remiss if I didn't send some yet further remembrances to Andrew Harvey and his family. Coming into this portfolio, I was really looking forward to the chance to be able to work with Andrew on the Affordable Housing Working Group. He'll really be missed. Over the past year, we at the city have taken direct action to realize our vision that St. John's can become a vibrant, inclusive, and thriving city with a wide range of affordable housing solutions that contribute directly to community health, sustainable growth, and economic security. And I hesitate to take any credit. I've been in this portfolio for about a month, but I'm really grateful for everyone who's come before me, and particularly for the work of all the folks down in our nonprofit housing division, Krista and Judy and your team. You're wonderful, wonderful folks. Thank you so much for driving the bus on all this. After many years' work, I was privy to some of this, particularly around consultations with massage parlors. We are pleased to say that the new Envision St. John's Municipal Plan and development regulations are now in legal effect. Good stuff, which include regulations that allow subsidiary dwelling units and as many residential zones as possible. Excellent. Incorporating provisions for tiny homes, supporting intensification and mixed-use development, allowing small apartment buildings in some residential zones, and we're trying to make the best use that we can of the land base we have to provide affordable housing. Really, really great stuff. We've also leveraged as much of our city-owned housing portfolio as we can to increase the supply of accessible and affordable housing units, including partnerships with Connections for Seniors and a pilot project to convert 4 vacant city-owned lower-end market housing units into 12 supportive housing units for seniors, and we're exploring partnerships with other nonprofits on similar models. Excellent work. The city, we've also been successful here at securing $250,000 from the Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation's Provincial Housing and Homelessness Partnership Fund to reconfigure one of the city's vacant 3-bedroom lower end market units into 2 rent-geared income units to serve low-income households. Really spectacular work. We've awarded 5 Housing Catalyst grants in 2021. Those grants support practical and collaborative projects which lead to large change in the sector. If you're interested in this year's grants, I encourage you to have a look, and I encourage you to do it really fast because the deadline is tomorrow. We're working to create a nonprofit housing strategic asset management framework to guide decisions of housing unit renewal and redevelopment. To support this work, we applied for and were approved for $100,000 from CMHC's seed preservation stream for 3 of the lower end of market project areas. This can be used to complete building condition assessments, age-friendly conversion assessments, accessibility assessments, and energy audits, among other things. Once those are complete, we'll use that information to guide decisions of housing unit renewal and redevelopment and to support subsequent applications for funding to support the work that we're doing. We are continuing to create a list of city-owned vacant land and buildings, and we're evaluating the inventory for potential redevelopment as affordable housing. And if there's anything we know, it's that we do need a substantial increase in the stock of housing, period, but particularly of affordable and non-market housing. So really great to know that I'm on a team that's making all this good stuff happen. We have identified 4. We have identified 4 parcels of city-owned vacant land for potential redevelopment as affordable housing, and we've signed a letter of intent to pursue a project on one of those. We've conducted engagement on the remaining 3 in summer and fall 2021 as well. We continue to engage multiple stakeholders in addressing the underreporting of property standards violations in rental housing. A safe and healthy housing presentation has been developed to engage service providers in a collaborative approach to address inadequate housing in St. John's. If you're interested in that, you can email our affordablehousing@stjohns.ca email, and we'll get you in touch with it. We've also received an allocation of $5 million through the CMHC Rapid Housing Initiative, and we've launched a request for proposals for nonprofits and charitable housing providers in St. John's in August. More about that coming in the near future. And we're continuing to look internally at our own policy and plans to see how we can unlock resources and better partner with community, the private sector, and all of our partners to create housing opportunities in our city. As I said, this is a portfolio that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and that I was cautioned in coming into it by someone who's formerly served on council, and I was told, listen, the housing portfolio is great stuff, but it's massive and it's really important work. So if you're going to do it, make sure you're dedicated, and I hope that's something that I show in the coming couple of years. Really, really pleased to be in community with you all and to have the chance to work with you all and to be sitting with you here today. I'm going to be in and out of this one. I'm also full-time with the provincial government's Office of Women and Gender Equality, and we're launching our Purple Ribbon campaign here today. So I'm not sure how present I'll be, but I want to thank you all for coming and for sitting in on this. And thank you to all the presenters as well. Please enjoy today's presentations and take a moment to reflect on all the great work the sector is doing and be proud of the work that you're all doing to improve the lives of so many others. Thanks, folks.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor. I'll hand it over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Ancroft. It was great to hear all the initiatives the city has going on. It seems like it's pretty busy for everybody in the housing space, so it's great to get that rundown. And just want to say welcome and thanks to everybody for joining. Thank you to our presenters, Joby and Taylor and Craig, and to Minister Abbott for making time out of your busy schedule to join us and to hear about what's going on in our community around housing and homelessness. And homelessness in St. John's, in the city of St. John's. It's natural that we co-host and co-sponsor and work together. We've enjoyed a very special relationship, having been with the city of St. John's for a number of years before transitioning into our own nonprofit, purpose-built nonprofit as the community entity, which is technical language for the fact that we are the federal government's sort of arm for the Reaching Home Canada's homelessness. Alongside the city, alongside the province, and alongside the community. And we're doing something different in our community that is exciting to tackle housing and homelessness related issues. So we enjoy that special relationship, and we have seen the importance of collaboration across the pandemic. When the pandemic struck, we were told to stay home. Not everybody was able to do that, or they weren't able to do so safely. So it was really important for us to find ways to collaborate with our community partners, with our provincial governments, with the municipality of the city of St. John's, to find ways to do that. Some of the ways that we've done that and supported individuals, especially those who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of doing so, is by supporting initiatives in the community, whether it's funding positions to support individuals who are staying in shelter or are experiencing homelessness, or supporting our partners with 211 and Food First NL to make sure that folks have access to supports the moment that they need that. So these are initiatives that were endorsed by our community and our partners, and we're able to support through the additional funding that the federal government has provided. Additionally, we're starting to see not just NL Housing Corporation and the provincial government come to play, but we're seeing the integration of primary healthcare services into that sector through partnerships with Eastern Health, supporting a harm reduction program that goes directly into community. It's often said that housing is healthcare, and it works both ways, and it's integrating those services together that is really going to make a difference in our community, and we're excited to be a part of that initiative with Eastern Health and our community partners. So I don't want to spend too much time talking a bit about the work that we are doing at Homeless St. John's, because it's often very technical, because we're mandated to integrate services like coordinated access and a shared information management system. But all that to say is those initiatives that are mandated by the federal government allow us to understand who's experiencing homelessness in our community in a real-time way. How do we prioritize those individuals and support them to find housing? How do we make strategic investments into supports and services at the community level to make sure that those individuals are served and supported? How do we weave together the number of initiatives, programs, services, housing units that are available through a coordinated approach? So we serve that system planning role, and it's fairly unique, especially as we've left the city. But the main thing that we're working towards is not just aligning community resources, but working towards some of the system changes that we know are leading individuals to experience homelessness to begin with. So we're really excited that we're able to work with the city, we're able to work with the provincial government, we're able to work with community partners to enact those types of changes. And today is just an opportunity for us to hear about some of the really great work that's going on in the community, to hear about some of the great changes coming through the provincial government that will help alleviate some of those system changes for the future. So really wanted to say thank you to our speakers, Joby and Taylor, to Craig, to Minister Abbott, and thank you to Krista and Brian Butt with CMHC, and to my colleague Matt as well for organizing and supporting the technical components of this. So I'll leave it there, but happy to answer questions as they arrive. Thanks again. I'll turn it over to you, Krista.
On mute. It's not a webinar if somebody doesn't forget to unmute themselves, right? Thanks, Doug. It's definitely lots of great work happening in the community, and everything that the city has accomplished, and as well as end homelessness, is all really dependent on the community working together. Nobody is doing this in isolation. The partnerships are so important in this sector. So our first presentation is titled Empowers Experience of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Housing. And our presenters are Joby Fleming and Taylor Castle. So Joby Fleming is the Advocacy Program Manager for Empower, the Disability Resource Center. He has over 20 years experience in disability advocacy in the community, and is the only professional providing cross-disability individual advocacy within Newfoundland and Labrador. Taylor Castle is a registered social worker who works for the Advocacy Program as the housing support worker. Taylor supports consumers in finding and maintaining safe, accessible, and affordable housing. So I just want to put a note that following their presentation, there will be a short Q&A. So feel free to post in the Q&A box as we go through if you have a question that jumps to mind. And if not, we'll open it up for questions after their presentation. So I'll hand it over to you, Joby and Taylor.
Good morning. Thank you, Krista, and thank you to everyone present this morning. It is an honor for us to present here today, and it's a real proud moment for us, I guess, with International Day for Persons with Disabilities coming, which is our big day on December 3rd, coming as well, that on the heels of that, basically, that we're presenting around inclusion. and disability, and that you guys asked for us basically to present and to make that the topic for the Housing Day presentation. So thank you very much for that. We're going to share our screen there and bring up the presentation. All right, can everybody see that there? Okay, wonderful. So again, my name is Joby Fleming, and Taylor Castle is here with me, and thank you for the introduction, Krista. A little bit about Empower. We're a nonprofit resource center. We're one of 26 locations across Canada. We're cross-disability, which means that we work with people with all different types of disabilities. So that could be people with mental health disabilities, physical disabilities, vision, hearing, ASD, learning disability, intellectual disability, and I'm going down through a list, but I know I can't include everyone, but we're really low barrier, and we include all types of people with disabilities that we work with. And that's unique about our center, because we are one of the only ones that is doing that. And out of the 26 locations across Canada of IL Canada, which is our national organization, we are one of very few actually that do at the advocacy program as well. Our building is located in St. John's, but we operate province-wide. And during the pandemic, it allowed us basically to pivot in a way that we're operating more virtually. We're providing more Zoom sessions with individuals and taking appointments as well by phone. So we're reaching further out in the province than we have in the past. But certainly we are here as well in the city, and we do see most of our centralized population here in the city, where services are able to be accessed more easily for people. This is our building. It's an old building built in 1979, and it's gone through some major structural changes, not the building, unfortunately, but the organization. So we are located in the east end of St. John's, and this building started out as a residential transition. It started out as Civic 4, when the idea was for people with disabilities, mainly physical disabilities at the time, to actually live in this building and to, I guess, transition into community from institution basically at the time by doing that. So our offices are old bedrooms, and our kitchen area is exactly that, and living room. So it's very much still the same structure as what it was, but very, very different in terms of the services and the support that we provide, and the mindset that we came into being. In 1997, the organization changed into the Independent Living Resource Center, ILRC, and started looking at the IL philosophy, which is, the biggest slogan of that is "Nothing about us without us," which is very commonly used by us today, and certainly in advocacy.
So I know one of the big topics for today is inclusion. Empower's vision is actually inclusion for all. So we envision Newfoundland and Labrador to be an inclusive community for all people, a society that embraces diversity and the rights of all individuals to choice, self-determination, and independent living. So we really follow this vision in all the services that we provide here at Empower.
And in doing so, we certainly help people I guess, navigate through many barriers that are there generally for people with disabilities. The one that may come to mind first off is the physical obstacles, the inaccessible environments. That's really looking at, if a ramp is there, if a building is looking at universal design, or following I guess building codes. It looks at the idea of the exemptions to the building code as well in buildings built prior to 81. It is, looking at all of these things that are going to be a huge conversation with obviously the Disability Act being proclaimed, which we're all very excited about for sure. But there are other barriers as well. Restrictive policies and systems we're finding more and more. We're finding basically policies coming up in an area where things are getting more difficult and more systems are finding themselves in somewhat of a crisis situation, honestly, in terms of how people with lived experience would explain that. So restrictive policies, for example, like if you are if you are being evicted and you're looking for shelter and you feel you're homeless, you feel it is a homeless situation, you have to wait literally until the very end. And the trauma that causes and mental health and anxiety for people, and as well people supporting like Taylor, for example, and many others in community, it's a real rush. It's a very reactive approach versus a proactive approach, which we try to advocate for every day in our policies. There are many other policies around home support, for example, that are very restrictive, needing personal care in order to receive home support under the disability category, the physical disability category, and many others. And we really are a partner in working with government, with our health authorities, and with the different crown corporations to be able to really look at those policies and how they truly affect people with disabilities. Inaccessible information and communication is a big one as well, making sure that everybody is able to get the information and able to communicate. And that goes to American Sign Language for people who are deaf, for example, to have interpreters through different processes that they may have, as well as print disabilities. So anyone using Braille who may be blind, or screen reader, adaptive technology. And it also goes to some areas of invisible disability. For example, if you have somebody who has a learning disability, who has difficulty filling out forms or applications, and they're asked in a discharge process to do that, and that you're not trying or you're not engaging, air quotes, because this is a word that is coming up a lot lately, we need to be understanding of that. That is a true barrier for people, and we are certainly there to intervene and support and explain and bring awareness around that. The number one in all my years of advocacy number one barrier has been attitude, a lack of awareness and understanding. And if you can change that attitude, if you can have someone really have an understanding and an open mind around disability and around accommodation, then there's not much further than that you need to go in order to be able to change the policies and have a working partnership. Barriers limit inclusion for everyone. They have the potential to affect every aspect of day-to-day life.
So Empower's programs and services are all aimed at addressing common barriers that are faced by people with disabilities. So there's a brief list here of all of our services. Firstly is the advocacy services. So Joby's the advocacy program manager, and housing support falls under that program. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. Some other programs we have is employment services, peer support groups. We also have employer supports and services. So this is the Inclusion NL program at Empower. We have technology services, the independent living internship. We also have volunteer services and research and development.
So we thought we'd give you a little bit of information about what we do here at Empower in terms of the advocacy program. We support consumers as they navigate through different systems in our province. And a lot of consumers really are experts. We tell them they're experts every day in their own disability in terms of their own lived experience is so important to us. Provide consumers with different options for breaking through barriers inherent within these systems. And we don't only give them kind of some solutions and talk them through that, but we really work with them all the way, step by step, through that process and support them. And that's what's really important to us. We provide consumers with the opportunity to build on skills that would help them become effective self-advocates. And honestly, our experience is that a majority of our consumers that we work with are very good advocates. They have already, before coming to us, have tried to go through the different systems, but they keep getting blocked, and they keep getting more and more kind of, as they feel, backed into a corner, that they're really not able to get through the systems. And we realize that because the systems are very difficult for us to try to navigate. And part of our work systemically is really working with the disability network and working with the community and government partners to be able to break down some of those barriers in that navigation to make things easier for people. And we certainly have done that as being part of the coordinated access to homes program within Homelessness St. John's. We feel that it is a very good avenue and vessel for us to be able to navigate through a lot of these systems together as a team and a collaboration, and we're very proud to be a part of that. We guide consumers in making their own decisions as well, and supporting consumers in building self-advocacy and self-confidence. We support consumers with accessing mental health services. Sometimes that's in a crisis intervention situation where we're really in an emergent situation with people, and we are providing that. We provide supportive counseling to people. Again, not treatment, but in terms of actually being there as a, empathetic ear to listen, active listening, and certainly being able to work through with people their best avenue and help them in supporting them in making their own decisions. We provide support through various assessments, such as home support assessments that are done through Eastern Health, as well as eligibility assessments for GoBus, for example, in the paratransit systems. We're also there certainly to support in any housing assessments that may be taking place. We support in applications, and we don't expect a consumer to be able to fill out an application and print it and give it to them. We basically will walk them through the application and give an understanding, because there is so much of applications that are complicated and cause a barrier in themselves. We recognize that the systems need the information. We recognize what is being collected, but we recognize as well that it's an intimidating process for people and make things even more difficult. So we're certainly there to provide support with that. And we provide support as well in not only filling out the applications, but submitting them and being an advocate and a liaison for the consumers, people with disabilities, basically, as they navigate with the different government systems. Food security is something that we have been a part of during the pandemic. It was new to us. I managed a food security program where I'm happy to say we provided over $70,000 in food security. We passed out to people with disabilities and supported them. And we did a needs assessment around that each and every time to see really what the need was and how we could support further than just providing the food security. And also to come down to really what the root issues were around the food security issues that people faced, and supported them in those as well. And we certainly advocate for more need of food security in community. We see the level of poverty with people with disabilities is growing. It is astronomical when we look at it, and we see that need firsthand with people, and really a desperateness around that. Certainly, we see that as housing is linked to healthcare, as Doug said. Food security is certainly a part of that as well, and it's a need, not a want. We provide the individual advocacy as well as systemic advocacy. Certainly, the patterns that we see in housing, financial, home support, and many other areas really lend their hand to systemic advocacy, and we work very closely with the Disability Network to do that, which is the other 17 organizations in the province providing support to people with disabilities of all types.
So as I mentioned, my role as housing support worker falls within the advocacy program. Housing support is a new area for Empower. Certainly, the advocacy program has been providing some level of housing support for quite some time, but we've had the opportunity to have me work as a housing support worker through funding through End Homelessness St. John's ever since January of 2021. So my role basically is to support our consumers in finding, maintaining safe, affordable, and accessible housing. So we know there's a lot of challenges that come with that, but I'm able to work with consumers to support them through evictions, support them through their experiences of homelessness, and do what I can also to prevent those evictions when possible. So I liaise with landlords and help our consumers navigate the Residential Tenancies Act, ensure that they know their rights as tenants, and ensure that their rights are being upheld. So another thing that I do as housing support worker is certainly provide support with relevant applications. So this could be housing specific applications, such as applying for subsidized housing with Newfoundland Labrador Housing Corporation or the City of St. John's. We certainly support consumers with those, also with income support applications, as we know people need an income to secure housing. So we work really closely with them to ensure that they have everything set up to the best of our ability to support them in securing housing. So as we mentioned, we do attend the Coordinated Access to Homes Resource Allocation Table with End Homelessness St. John's and community partners. This has been a great opportunity for us. It's really great to meet every week with our community partners and to really collaborate and work really closely together to best support the vulnerable people in our community. It's been a great opportunity for all of us to really come together and provide the best support possible. So I'm going to chat a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion in housing. So I do have the definitions here of these terms. So I will read out. Diversity is defined as a demographic within a community which respects and appreciates differences in ethnicity, gender, age, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, education, and religion. It means that people bring diverse perspectives, world experiences, lifestyles, and cultures. So when we talk about diversity in terms of the services we provide at Empower and in relation to housing, Empower is a really low barrier service. So we provide service to a very diverse population. As we mentioned, we work cross disability. So that's any type of disability. And we also, have a wide range of consumers with diverse gender, age, national origin, all these things that fall under the definition of diversity. And so when we work with this diverse group, it's important for us to really work from a client-centered approach and understanding that this diversity affects the needs of these individuals. So each disability is very different. So that means that the needs in housing specifically for each person with a disability is going to be very different as well. So we really take that into consideration in the work that we do with our consumers and really work as in a partnership with them to best determine their needs and support them the best that we can. So the definition of equity is the fair and respectful treatment of all people. Equity is the process and equality is the result. So it includes creating fair access, opportunity, and advancement for all people with disabilities and identifying and eliminating barriers. So we see that, as I mentioned, the services for people with disabilities are based on their needs. So when people with disabilities have accommodations and have fair access, that provides opportunity for them and advancement. So we work really closely with them to ensure that they do have access to those accommodations that they need in relation to housing and other areas in their lives. And we work closely to eliminate the barriers that they face in terms of, the applications they struggle with and accessing different services. So we really work with our consumers to ensure that they are treated fairly and respectfully in all areas of their life, but certainly with my position specifically in relation to accessing appropriate housing for their needs. And lastly, the definition of inclusion is the creation of an environment where everyone feels welcome, is treated with respect, and able to fully participate. So as I mentioned, Empower's vision is inclusion for everyone. So we really bring that into all of the services we provide, certainly within housing, ensuring that people feel included in and have opportunities and choices when in relation to housing. So one thing in inclusion is certainly advocating for more accessible housing. So ensuring that people with disabilities have choice in where they live and have that opportunity to really make those decisions and ensure that their needs are met. So some of the barriers that we have seen recently in relation to accessible housing, certainly I'll note that when we talk about accessible housing, we're not talking, specifically wheelchair accessible, as that is, probably the first thing a lot of people think of. But when we talk accessible housing, as we do work with people with all types of disabilities, it's important to think about what their needs are and what would be accessible to them. As well, not just for a physical disability. So one of the barriers that we see right now is certainly availability of housing in the market. We know it's a really competitive market right now. It's really challenging to secure housing for individuals. And so that's not only wheelchair accessible, but it certainly does make an extra challenge to find wheelchair accessible housing. Another thing is the affordability. So because of that competitive rental market right now, landlords are increasing their rental prices. So it then becomes more challenging to find any affordable housing for our consumers. And then if we do look at wheelchair accessible, then that becomes even more expensive. It's really challenging to find appropriate funding sources that would actually be able to support our consumers in accessing the accessible wheelchair accessible units in the city. So navigating the complex systems and policies, as Joey mentioned, is certainly a big one in relation to housing. The application processes and, even the process of, setting up a viewing with a landlord and going and applying for the apartment. It's a lot for some of our consumers to work through. So we work really closely with them in that, but certainly it's some systems that are just challenging to navigate. One thing certainly is, how long it will take for an inspection for a unit, and how long it can take to apply for different subsidies. So it's some things that are certainly challenging for our consumers, but we provide support the best we can. Another barrier that we've been seeing recently is obtaining references. So as I mentioned, the competitive rental market means landlords are asking for references more than they ever have before. Some of our consumers don't have references. They might not have a good rental history, or they might not have a reference from a previous landlord for various different reasons. So we certainly work with our consumers to provide support the best we can in overcoming that barrier for sure. And again, one of the biggest barriers certainly is the attitudinal barriers from landlords. We see a lot of landlords who, don't have an understanding of the needs of people with disabilities, and or even the residential tenancies processes. So we work with landlords to try to secure housing for our consumers and to prevent eviction and all of that. One experience we actually had recently was consumers had an eviction, and there's a process to go through with that, and a landlord actually threatened to remove a ramp off a house to try to force the consumers out, which is certainly not an understanding of their disability and the need for that ramp to be there for their health and for their empowerment. So the attitudinal barrier is probably the biggest barrier that we face as well. And lastly, access to other resources that are required to secure and maintain housing. So, providing a roof over somebody's head is one thing, but having the resources to sustain that is super important as well. And we really try to work with our consumers to ensure they have the resources to maintain that housing. So that could include home support. So if somebody does have a personal care need, then they do need home support wherever they are going to live. So we work with them to access those resources. Sometimes it can be challenging to ensure that they have adequate amount of hours to help them maintain that living arrangement. But we really do work and advocate for them in those cases. Certainly the other one is mental health support. The same sort of thing, that we try to work with our consumers and ensure they have access to mental health supports to maintain their living arrangements. And it's certainly a challenge, but
so some opportunities to navigate these challenges. I guess we look ahead. We learn from the past always and the present, but we look ahead to the future. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, as Minister Abbott knows, we are all very excited, of course, for the proclamation of the disability accessibility legislation. And we've all worked very hard towards that, I think, in our advocacy over many years, working with government. So to see this come through is kind of a little bit of a relief, of a breath of relief that we can take. However, there's a lot of work there to do when working with government on that, and we recognize that. But by having the legislation, we hope there will be more accessible units available in the future, and we're very happy with where things are going in the mindset, certainly of the federal government and provincial government in looking at the need for that, for sure. And we hope under the standards with the accessibility legislation that that is highly considered, and certainly, as we know, it will be, but certainly at an expedited rate of where we are, of what we need at this time. And I also caution, I guess, a little bit from our experience and lived experience from our consumers is the size of some of the supportive housing units that are being developed. We have some concerns around the idea of home support need. For example, if somebody has a personal care need, then being in a bachelor style supportive housing can be really, really difficult. If someone has, 6 to 7, 8 hours of home support need there, but, still need the affordability and still need that supportive housing arrangements, that we feel that there's going to be some challenges around some of what actually is there currently. And I think we need to look at some learned experiences and best practices around that, rather than kind of trying to say we need to fit all into one area. The other area that I guess we look at, and from hearing from our consumers, is not to put all of that in one area, in one place, but really spread that out throughout the city and the province. So people have choice of where they want to live. For example, if they want to live in the East End, if they want to live in the downtown area or the West End, just to speak of St. John's, that choice should be there. That inclusion should be there to live in our communities as everyone else, instead of basically one centralized area because this is where the affordable housing is that's accessible. Because we certainly know, and we're looking clearly and closely at the affordable aspect of that accessible housing, because some of the rates of some of those housing that are available, the very little that is, when Taylor looks and we look at viewings or we look at what is presented to us, is anywhere between about 1,500 a month to about 3,000 a month. And it can go very, very, a lot higher than that. These are perfectly dreams. These are, the rub the bottle and get the genie kind of dreams for people of what to live would be wonderful in accessible housing. But we also, know that there are some legislation there around assisted living, I guess, as well, where some people make the choice that they need to be in that situation instead of struggling with home support to a degree in terms of living in their own home. But there are policies there that really prevent some of our personal care homes, and as we build more and as newer ones are built, from being able to do that. And some of the thoughts of that is that it's actually cheaper to actually look at that route when someone chooses that than it is to provide a high level of home support in the home. And it's not that we don't agree with people living in their home. That is our first choice. But again, this should be the choice of the consumer. And it's the right to choose under the independent living philosophy that the choice should be there. And some of the restrictive policies around some of that really are not making much sense right now that we're trying to navigate our way through for some people. Continuing to provide awareness on the needs of people with disabilities in relation to housing. We're happy to be at the table to do that at every level. We're certainly happy to bring the voice of consumers forward with cross disabilities in this, in terms of from having a disability, but also the lived experience around housing and homelessness that they've experienced as well is something that we're certainly there to do, and to provide the disability lens to the different policies that are there and the different tables that we sit at. So really happy and honored to Taylor and I and Empower to be a part of that process at this point. But we certainly thought that the time is now that this was necessary. Important steps forward. Continuing to have resources available to provide intensive housing support for people with disabilities. What we're doing at Coordinated Access to Homes, I can't speak high enough in terms of bringing housing support workers into community instead of staying, I guess, within government to look at these things, or to be kind of with only a few organizations within community, but making it more broad around the table. That work is just invaluable, and at this point, completely essential. So continuing that work, we really certainly want to be a part of in the steps forward, and we truly feel that that is necessary to navigate through the housing issues that we have now for people. Continuing the collaboration in community facilitated through End Homelessness St. John's, the Coordinated Access to Homes resource allocation table. Increased rent subsidies to increase access to affordable and accessible housing, and making sure that they're portable is very important to give the choice, And sometimes it's not the choice, but it's the need really for people in terms of having to be able to move and having to be able to look at different options that may be available. Also, I would say, looking at our shelter system and looking at the inaccessibility in that is something as a challenge right now for us. We get calls every day. We're working on cases right now that are in discharge from hospital, where someone's transitioning into disability. We know that there are 100 acute care beds, for example, last that I heard, being held right now because there's no availability in housing or workers. We've heard from discharged social workers of not being able to find the adequate home support to be able to meet the need safely, that someone can even go back to their home. So this is affecting our healthcare system, and we know we're under strain in that area. But if for one moment, do not think that housing is not a part of that. As Doug said rightfully, healthcare and housing needs to be considered together, and it's not at this point in time from what we see, certainly from things like discharge from acute care. We thank you for the opportunity, and we certainly are available for any questions that anyone has. This is our contact information to reach myself or Taylor, certainly, and always happy to speak to anyone and support or take referrals for anyone that may need our support to work collaboratively with you, or certainly to help the consumers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joby and Taylor. That's a really interesting presentation, a lot to take in. Just wondering if there are any questions. We've got one in the chat from Brian. It says, thanks, Empower. What supportive housing model options would you like to see for folks experiencing various disabilities in communities in NL? What changes or investments might be needed to realize this?
So great question. We really need to look at what we call supportive housing, and we need to look at who we're providing that to and in what manner. One of the ways I said was space. Space is certainly an issue there. When we look at people's needs of accommodation in terms of equipment, for example, someone may have commodes, or they may have lifts, or they may have different things that they need, hospital bed. I can tell you from touring some of this right now in terms of the supportive housing and the new that that is there, new supportive housing. This is not old builds. This is new thoughts that we're really concerned of how someone fits into those models, and someone fits into that space, and looking at the comorbidity aspect of people needing that supportive housing, but also having the physical need of disability. For example, when we have accessible bed sitters, we've had this challenge where trying to find a home support agency to go into that bed sitter environment is very, very difficult. And that what we need to really realize is that means that people's needs are not being met. And that's a dignity issue. That's also a safety issue. So those are some things that we are happy to be certainly being exploring and looking at in the future. In terms of funding, I think partners need to come together more in terms of more of that tier model, I guess, of funding, where income support, the health authorities, and NL Housing all look together to come up with a funding model that just works for people, to be able to put people in safe, affordable, accessible housing, for example, and to be able to meet their needs. Another area that I've been advocating for years, if people have been listening to me, I know Doug certainly have heard me say this before, and Minister Abbott as well, is and probably Craig, we need to really look at what we're doing in providing support to people. And what I mean by that is we need to really respect the idea that people don't just have a physical disability, don't just have an intellectual disability, don't just have mental health, but we need to look holistically at individuals. And the only way truly that I feel from my experience that this is going to work, and I'm speaking the voice of consumers, is all of that need to be under one roof in terms of the support we're providing in the health authorities. We need community supports and mental health and addictions outreach under the same roof, under the same directors working collaboratively together, collaboratively. So it is really important that change, because right now we have a swinging pendulum from one, whether it be, okay, they are not eligible for home support. So then, and we see this at the coordinated access table. So then we switch over and we try to find a mental health worker. No, they don't have enough diagnosis for mental health. So then we're swinging back to home support. And really at the end of the day, you know, when the grass, when elephants fight, it's the grass that gets trampled. And, you know, I use that analogy because it's really true. And in the systems, in terms of where we are and the coordinated access, and I guess the restrictive policies, looking at all of that right now and where advocacy is and navigation, that is exactly what is happening in the city of St. John's and in the province around the support needs of people with disabilities. We certainly see this on a daily basis, and we struggle with it. We also struggle with the idea when you have someone, for example, with an intellectual disability who also has mental health, and they can't get, you know, a BMS, behavior management specialist, because, well, that's mental health and we just don't cover that. But then you go to mental health and they get kicked off of adult central intakes wait lists because they have an intellectual disability and they can't do counseling. So where do someone really truly fit in? Because what we have available as systems right now, and when I'm working with true case consults, interdisciplinary wise, within the sector and within the systems, we hear, well, there's nowhere really for that person to go. That's wrong in 2021. That's wrong when we're about to proclaim a Disability Act in this province. And I know I'm making big statements, but I'm making them because they really need to be heard at this point in time right now. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Jovi. There is another question here from Lisa. Do you think the health accord will be part of the solution of some of the issues you have identified?
I do. I'm really happy to see that the social determinants of health are certainly being looked at in the health accord. We've had the pleasure and the privilege to be able to present to the chairs of the health accord, the co-chairs, and they really do get it. I think, you know, as we've been in the town halls, I truly feel that the health accord wants to certainly look at going down this road. But as they said in the last town hall this week, they need the advocacy of community and the people of this province to really bring forward to government the need really to pursue this in the 10-year strategy around healthcare, and really looking at this and looking at, you know, the idea of I really want to look at in healthcare the idea that people with disabilities, you know, may not be the people who have drug addictions all the time. They may not be the people who are homeless and in our shelters, but they still are vulnerable and they still have the need. And we saw that in the pandemic when we stepped up as an organization with the Disability Network, certainly supporting us in working in partnership with Eastern Health, and we thank them for it, to really look at vaccinations and the vaccination rollout for people with disabilities as part of that vulnerable sector, and being able to really look creatively and openly of what public health and the chief medical officer was saying in terms of the levels of the phases that people with disabilities fell into that. The same as in congregate living, and the vulnerable. And we were really happy to be able to do that. And for that reason, we got the majority of our population, I'm happy to say, vaccinated. We also work individually in terms of that with Eastern Health in the individual cases that come forward around heavy anxiety, heavy PTSD, ASD, intellectual disability, of not being able to get a vaccine by going the regular route, and looking at basically accommodating that. Looking at accommodating as well in terms of people who had allergies and you know, could be in shock situation or trauma situations, by getting the vaccine, having a controlled environment to be able to do that within our healthcare system. And we had that openness with top level management really to do that. And that was really great, where, you know, example of where community could work very closely with management in healthcare to be able to provide that. So, so yeah, that's, you know, that's certainly some of the areas that we need to look at as well.
Yeah, and there's one other question. So from Karen, as a realtor myself, I have heard the from the majority that people are pricing their homes and rentals higher because there are a lot of people defacing their properties? Is there supports there to cover the landlord's interest as well? That could also be a Doug question.
I'm going to pass that one to Doug, if that's okay, Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joby and Taylor, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of your work. It's always great to hear you talk about all that work that you're doing, and having worked in community mental health, like seeing your passion and your integration of cross disability is awesome. So I just wanted to make sure I said that and got that out of the way, because it's really, we're fortunate as a community to have you, the two of you, and Empower. In terms of those price points, one of the programs that we operate at Homeless St. John's is called Home Connect. And the idea behind that was through years of consultation with private market landlords, is because they are like, this is a market that we have to tap into if we're gonna end homelessness in our community. The consultations really did talk about the issue of like stigma and potential for damage and risk for damage. And so Home Connect was really born out of those consultations and that feedback, which has allowed us to structure a program to support landlords by providing assurances for like a damage fund, for example. A lot of challenges that we've seen too is just the timing of tenancies, right? So we can provide a holding fee to maintain a unit until somebody can move in before an income support payment can be generated. So we can do these things faster and to ensure that those units remain available for folks. So Home Connect is really a program that is, you know, working with landlords, but also working with our community partners to ensure that supports are in place. Joby, you touched on supported housing and the importance of supports in home. And that's one of the things that we are working with our community partners to ensure. So any tenancies that go through Home Connect, facilitated through that process, has a back-end support available to an individual in case they need that. And we're seeing a lot of success with that program. We've seen, you know, several damage claims come forward, but nowhere near the amount that I think the stigma would be. I think the more of the opportunities, and we've seen landlords really take this up, has been around Indigenous cultural humility training that we've made available for landlords, and mental health first aid that we'll continue to make available for landlords so that they understand, you know, where those individuals are coming from and how they can support them too. Because we do see landlords who really do care and want to contribute. And so we do provide those supports, and we're looking to grow that over time. But so that's one program, and we're really fortunate as a community to be able to offer that. Most communities don't have that, so we're fortunate to have a really strong team who can work with landlords, who can work with community, and who can work with some of these larger property development companies to make those tenancies available. So there are supports, and happy to chat anytime about that.
Thanks, Doug. So there's no more questions right now. So certainly thank you, Taylor and Joby. As I think Doug said it best, in terms of seeing your passion and your dedication to your consumers is really inspiring. Oh, we got a question in the chat. I guess we can answer that in the chat. We'll move along. So our next speaker is Craig Reed. Craig is an advocate for persons with disabilities. He's the past president of the Universal Design Network of Newfoundland and Labrador and the current president of the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. His knowledge is based around accessibility and the built environment. So Craig's presentation today is titled The New Accessibility Act and Universal Design, a Winning Solution for Everyone. So I'll pass it over to Craig.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, City St. John's. And homelessness minister Abbott, and all the other presenters. Joby, thank you very much for all the work you do for the community, man. You and down at Empower, the work you do is invaluable. There's no doubt about it. That individual advocacy is such an integral piece of making sure people have accessibility. So I'm going to bring a little bit of an overview of what I see happening from my experience through all the processes of being an advocate, working with Universal Design Network, as well as the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities and government. So I'm going to talk about affordable, accessible housing, not just affordable housing. The ratio right now for persons looking for accessible housing is 5 to 1. That's reality. 5-to-1 ratio of persons looking for accessible housing in the market. There's nothing in the market today that's really substantial. That's going to make a difference. We have to look at it as those that are creating new environments have to be part of our healthcare system. Minister Abbott, you wrote an article, a report over a decade ago. I've been advocating the same thing, talking about aging gracefully at home and bringing our healthcare resources into the community, because it's going to save us a lot of money versus white coats like we have it now. That's the only way we can deal with it. This whole thing of the healthcare aspect, creating universally designed buildings costs no different. Doesn't impact aesthetics. If you don't believe me, go to any Disney resort, go to any of the biggest theme resorts in the world. Every one of them is based on the principles of universal design, accessibility for everybody, regardless of ability. And that's the reality. So I'm going to give you a little bit of stats to bring everybody up to date of where we're to within our province and what's going on. So when I talk about disabilities across the spectrum, I'm talking about cognitive, eyesight, hearing, sensory, speech, invisible, physical disabilities. It's a lot of people. It's 1/4 of our population right now. 1/4 of our population right now recognize having a disability. In 25 years, 50% of our province will have a disability. This is a reality. This is not just for our province. In Canada right now, the statistics are between 22 and 25%. Globally, it's around 22%. We are staying older longer. We have a beautiful healthcare system. So now we have to make sure we have the availability to afford our healthcare system. The PERT report, Damar Green made it very clear, we can't afford to build any more long-term care facilities. We can't have institutionalized care being our solution. When we're talking about accessibility, as Jody brought over, there's over 100 persons right now waiting to find accessible environments to be able to live. Not all of them are in long-term care. Some of them are home environments. And this is reality when you got people in a holding pattern for years because there's nothing available, nor the support mechanisms to do it. So it has to be a spider web strategy, as I see it from my perspective, as you have to include community-based organizations into this equation. They are the frontline services for the people in Newfoundland and Labrador, period. So when we take that into account, we have to look at, the stats, the Building Accessibility Advisory Board and the recommendations. This was something that really impressed me when they put them out this year. The number one statement that was there from the beginning said, the biggest limitation to accessibility in Newfoundland and Labrador is the 1981 Building Exemption Clause. The biggest barrier to accessibility in Newfoundland and Labrador is a clause that denies accessibility. Right now, we have an Accessibility Act that's coming on the books, so we're going to have two contrary-minded pieces of legislation. One's not going to stand to a charter challenge if it's ever brought there. So the reality is, when we take on human rights from the UN, and we're doing a proclamation of all this stuff, and Jody said it's important we talk about this. And we're talking about the limitations of not making buildings accessible because they were built before 1981. Well, the board did a wonderful job. They made recommendations of a 20-year period to bring this over so that the impact on individuals is not substantial and it's phased in. And within the new legislation of the Accessibility Act, there's also a section in there for mitigation. Now, you're not going to see all the boards diminish because of the new board from the Accessibility Act. And Building Accessibility Advisory Boards and others will still be there. So I'm very, I think very confident that the 1981 building exemption will be removed and that people will move towards that. You got the CMHC right now saying that if you're building a building with more than 4 apartments in it, you have to be universally designed. That's going to be on their website very shortly if it's not up already. So everybody's on board to that. And if you think universal design doesn't have measurements, all you need to do is look at our new mental health hospital. It is based 100% on universal design. What it is, it creates choice for your architect, where you have functionality meeting aesthetics. Universal design is about how things work, not how things look. Architects make things beautiful, but they also deal with how things work. So this gives our new opportunities for anybody that's in construction or doing anything new to create some brilliant environments. Does it cost more to be universally designed? No, not if you take it from the design stage at the beginning. It will be the same. The most I've ever heard of is less than 1% increase if you take it at the beginning in the design stage. If you design something and then come back and say, can we make it accessible? That doesn't work, because you've already built a building that's not accessible on paper. So now you're trying to remeasure things, and all of a sudden you're saying, oh, we've run out of room. We have to be more cognizant of what we're doing. The Universal Design Network, udnnl.ca or codnl.ca, both of those have different things to give examples of how universal design works and doesn't impact aesthetics. If you're building an affordable, accessible housing unit and you have multiple apartments there, for me, it's about what you don't see, not so much what you do see. So while you're in a frame situation before gyprock and everything goes up, you make sure that within your bathroom environment, you have bracing in the proper places. You have bracing in the ceiling above the tub before you put the gyprock down. When you go into a master bedroom, you make sure that you have over the bed where it would be normally located reinforcements for a lift. Because this kind of stuff, if it ever has to be used, won't be cost prohibitive if it's already there. You don't see it because it'll be all covered up with gyprock. But if you need to use it, you don't have to demolition your house. If you're building a house today, first thing I would tell you to do is make sure you have ground floor entry. Your main floor is an open floor concept. You can put a second story on your house and a basement in it if you want. But the first thing I would tell you to do is make sure that you have stacked closets that go up with knockout floors in the bottom that doesn't affect the structural integrity of any way, shape, or form, so that in the case you ever had to put an elevator in there, the allocation for space is already there. All you're talking about is cost of hardware. That's a big difference when you don't have to get architects and structural engineers in there. The Accessibility Act, I'm really excited about. John knows this, Minister Abbott knows this. This is truly an amazing piece of legislation to create the framework for regulations coming under. It has some absolutely brilliant checks and balances in it. Right away, there's going to be the creation of a standards board. Creating standards for everybody is brilliant. It takes a long time, doesn't happen overnight, but it is imperative moving forward that we do have standards and accessibility. On that board will be 7 to 9 people, and half of them will be persons with disabilities or representative of organizations, persons with disabilities, and at least one Indigenous individual. So what does that mean? That means the disability community doesn't have to ask to be at the table anymore. We have a permanent seat there. That's so important. Nothing about us without us. And that's what's about, creating something that works. And if you're not investing in hearing what the stakeholders actually say about legislation that's being created for them, then typically it misses the mark. That's been our experience. So this is the opportunity to change things around. The proclamation, like we said, will be on December 3rd, and it's fantastic. There's nothing I can say negative about what the potential is for this legislation and its potential. And it all depends on who's behind it. And politics change, but like I said, there are checks and balances in there. It has to be reviewed every 5 years. So like the opposition said in the House of Assembly, regardless what party's in power, this legislation should move forward, creating regulations for everybody. So accessibility in our home environments is a huge issue. With the 1981 building exemption coming off the books, means anybody who has a commercial endeavor and they're claiming a 1981 building exemption, that's going to go away. And you will have to become accessible. And that's real. I take a real strong attitude of it. If it's not accessible for everybody, tear it down. Human rights. If it's not accessible to everybody, then it's not accessible to anybody, period. And what does that do? That creates jobs for Newfoundlanders. Because I'm sure you're going to hear downtown people screaming, oh my God, the heritage of the buildings are going to go, we're going to have to tear them all down, and we're going to tear them all down rather than keep them up. I say, good on you. You're going to create jobs for Newfoundlanders to tear down the buildings. You're going to create jobs for Newfoundlanders to build them back up in an accessible way. It's a win-win situation for industry and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. A few buildings do not make our province's heritage. Never has, never will. So when we're keeping things like that in mind, accessibility is paramount moving forward. It impacts our healthcare system. It impacts how we live, how we can interact within our community, and what's going on. Profitability and accessibility are intertwined. And if you're not accessible and you own a business, well, think about it. And you're walking 25% of the population base now. When the big boats come in and do their tours, the majority of them are my age, in their 50s and older, and a lot of them have disabilities, and they're going downtown. And when you got the old-fashioned door handle where you pull down on the brass trigger, that's impassable for a lot of things. That's an immediate barrier. So creating standards is going to be so essential for how we access our community. So I'm excited for what Minister Abbott gets to do with this legislation. Our private community gets to understand that accessibility is directly tied with profitability. Like I say, the ADA in the United States, the American Disability Act, has 25 years on us. Every resort, everything that's built, from Walmart's to Costco's to whatever, all based on the principles of universal design, because it's profitable. And that's a reality. So I think that if we're doing this and we do it right, the potential for the city of St. John's, and we think about rural Newfoundland as well, ensuring that those individuals are not left behind, because that's a big key piece as well for our disability community. A lot feel imprisoned and locked away basically, and not able to access any services and resources. So we hope that we can look at the broader Newfoundland as a whole, but I think that this has good potential for the city of St. John's. So that's it for me. I'm not going to talk too much more about that, because I'm sure if you have any questions about universal design or the Building Accessibility Advisory Board and their recommendations or the new act, I can absolutely answer the best of my ability. But there is change coming, and it's good change. And it's going to impact the province for generations. And that's so important for us, because we're all at a place in time now where we get to see this change take place. Where you have it literally, you have a government standing behind accessibility saying, we have to move this forward. It's so important for our community. Never heard that before, and it's brilliant to hear. So I thank our government, and I leave it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. I remember when we were chatting earlier and talking about some of those statistics about 50% of the population having a disability in the relatively near future. It's astounding. There are a few questions in the chat. One was, do you also include people with mental health issues? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, when you're talking about across the spectrum, because the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, we've been around since 1983. We advocate on a systemic level, not an individual. Joby and his team with Empower, they do the individual advocacy. That's such an important key integral part. We do the systemic advocacy as it impacts everybody across the province with disabilities, across the spectrum. So that would be, in this situation, we're talking about the built environment. We make sure it's accessible for those with cognitive issues, eyesight. So we're using proper materials, we're using proper paints, color schemes, lighting. It's a lot more to it than just the physical environment, making the doorway bigger and bringing doorknobs down and light switches down, that kind of stuff. There's a lot more to it than that. And it does impact health, mental health, and everybody else in between. I hope that answers.
Perfect. There was a comment too, it said the Tommy Sexton Center is a good example of building a universally designed building. And then another question said, is there a standard diversity lens that can be used moving forward? There are so many places here that are not accessible. Some restaurants and bars downtown have actually done renovations, but have not made their building accessible. It's not an issue for them.
Yeah, what I'd like to see take place in that is Transportation and Works have set up their own manual of accessibility based on the principles of universal design, and it's a brilliant piece of work. I would love to see that be made available to people in Newfoundland and Labrador so that they have a bearing of what commercial design should be about and what measurements should be in place. The Universal Design Network has those things as well. But what was the question again?
Sorry. Yeah, is there a standard diversity lens that can be used moving forward?
A standard one?
Yes.
Let's hope that the standards board can create that, because there has to be. But we all think too now that not every, there's not one aspirin that works for everybody. Not everybody can fit in that block all the time. So we do have to keep that lens of individuals as well. That's so important, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Craig? I don't know if anybody's. Okay, there is a remaining question actually for Joby and Taylor. I apologize to Catherine. She had raised her hand, but it wasn't showing on my screen. So I think Matt's going to be able to allow her to speak.
Hi, am I there?
Yeah, you're there.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to make, bear with me, I have a vocal cord problem. I wanted to make a couple comments on what Joby and Taylor were saying for feedback more so than a question. It has to do with, first of all, home support system and the housing support are different. Housing support means you have somebody available like either 24/7 or a few hours, regular hours or whatever, which would include, somebody for housing, someone maybe for mental health, somebody for navigating the system, whatever. So it's like a team, and it's housing support in that way. A home support is like we know it. It's home support workers coming into your home. A lot of us on the ground feel that the home support system needs to be overhauled. A lot of people are not happy, and has not been for many, many years. And I've been at this since 1983. So, I'm very aware of what people are saying, and I'm very involved in the community. And a lot of people are saying that, and have said that the home care agencies are not effectively equipped to deal with home support. It was like an offloading by Eastern Health, basically, to, here you go, we'll just private contract that out and you guys do it or whatever. And there's a lot of problems with that. And a lot of times they're not willing to work with you. So they'll send strangers into your home. They'll send somebody in when they have them, and it's not always in sync with your own schedule. And our home is our home. We should have say in who comes into our home, how often someone comes into our homes, things like that. The other thing is we're hearing a lot, and I agree, that home support workers need to be trained. Maybe it needs to be a trade like the personal care assistants, where you go to school for, a year and you learn about cross disabilities, you learn about different things, and you're more of like a profession or a trade when you graduate. And that would actually also back up then higher pay. But you're getting skilled, educated workers, because right now, to find a good worker in home support is very, 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 very difficult to find a good home support worker that can actually do the various tasks. And now, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, we're getting people from other countries. So therefore, I know here in my building, in the seniors building where I live, there's a huge language barrier. So like, the seniors are saying after their workers leave, I have no idea what that person was saying. I have no idea what they said Go Bus said. I have no idea what they said to the doctor. Or like, I don't think they understood me when I asked them to do this or asked them about this. And that's a problem. It's a real problem. So maybe if home support workers had an educational requirement, that could be a part of it, as English as a second language, to minimize that language barrier. And there's a lot more that I could say, but I won't take up any more time. But for COD, I just want to say, how come we never hear from you? Like, how come as in the community, like there's no community engagement, I guess, with persons with disabilities? I mean, a lot of what you say is good and whatnot, but there's not a lot of consultation on the ground, in the community without us having to find things on our own, and that goes with all disability groups. So why not more public consultations on things like this, so that, you're hearing it from more people and not just, I guess who's this tied to your group. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. I can tell you the coalition is very proud of the work that we did on the accessibility legislation itself, because we were involved in all the consultations across the province and Labrador. So it was a brilliant opportunity for us to meet all the individuals, the advocates, the stakeholders within the community. The coalition itself tends to work more in the background versus the public, but I can tell you that we are moving to tackle some greater issues. So I'm excited about where we're going as the coalition in the next few years. I'm sure that everybody will be excited as well. There's a lot of things going on within our disability community right now, and it's exciting for everybody, like I say, and a lot of it has to do with what the government's doing. So I'll give them full credit for that. It's a brilliant aspect, and for me to say that, that's something. So yeah, no, I'm happy. And the coalition, like I say, you will hear more from us. Just right now during this whole consultation process, a lot of work has been done behind the scenes. So that's all I can say about that.
Thanks, Craig. Any other questions for Craig? No, we'll move along. So we were hoping to have a little bit of a group discussion. I don't know if it'll be much of a discussion in terms of we'll be able to all kind of interact on the same Jam board. We originally hoped to do breakout rooms, but apparently that's not a function that's allowed in a webinar. We just figured that out today, unfortunately. So I'm going to put a Jam board in the chat here, which folks can link on, or they can make comments in the chat or through Q&A, and we can add them in. And I will share my screen. So I hope everybody got that. I think I sent it to everyone. And I'll share my screen here so you can all see our Jam board. Everyone see that? So we wanted to dive in, the focus of today's session has certainly been around accessibility and universal design and those types of things. But we really know that the theme, equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing can be very far reaching and has many sub themes as well. So we wanted to give an opportunity for folks in the audience to kind of give us some ideas of what what equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing mean to you. You can, if anybody's in there, you can actually click and add a little sticky note over on the side here, and it'll give you an opportunity to type in your thoughts and comments, and we can have a little discussion from there. It doesn't look like we have too many people in here, but I can't quite see the chat here now, Matt. Are there any questions in the chat or any thoughts? So some of the things we want people to reflect on is, so they're all posted here, but what does equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing mean to you? Where are the current gaps and what are the key challenges for achieving this in housing? What solutions do you propose for addressing some of these challenges? And are there other topics and sub-themes that you'd like to learn more about when it comes to this theme in housing? So we certainly know that there are lots of topics that fall under this. I know Taylor did a great slide around the definitions of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and all the categories that can fall in there. Any thoughts from our panelists too?
Yeah, I was going to type a sticky note in there, but I'll just jump in, Krista. It was great to hear the work of the disability community locally and provincially, and how they've been able to really influence the provincial legislation. And EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, is something that a lot of organizations, ours included, are trying to strive towards. And how do we embed those types of lenses within programs and services and housing options? Because it is broader than just disability. It also includes underrepresented populations, and how do we support that? So something that's just topical for me is, how do we ensure we're meeting the needs of individuals from populations that we don't typically see, or that the needs haven't been identified in really nuanced ways for us to improve our ability to provide services and supports. So I'm looking to the audience and panelists as ways to address those issues, so that we can build a system that's more inclusive for the long term.
Thanks, Doug. I just saw there was one in the chat too. We need to make sure that everyone is safely housed and supported in the community. We do need to develop a disability and diversity lens to provide others with information on how to be more inclusive and diverse. And there's some other comments here too. What does equity, diversity, inclusion mean to you? Transparency is one, and some solutions there. Rent control with the province could help with inclusive housing. I like everything's firing in now. Everybody's had a minute to think about it. Essential aspects of a just society. Open this one up. Including international students and those with precarious immigration status in the conversation about housing, and take action to eliminate immigration status as eligibility criteria for housing related supports. Private housing market is so subjective. Essential services cannot be withheld on a whim.
I'm going to speak to one there as well, Krista, that we're finding certainly in as a gap, is when we're really trying to provide, I guess, the accessible, affordable housing, the option C, in terms of to work with our friends with CRA, is very, very difficult. And it is a barrier, and it's being seen as a barrier in all of community, to be able to actually access and get that. I mean, we need to realize that, some of the people that we're working with, one, they're going through trauma. They're going through many issues when you're looking at homelessness, for example, and you're trying to do applications. Their world is just upside down in some cases, and it's really difficult from what we see that barrier still exists today. It is certainly one we look at in cross disability with somebody with an intellectual disability trying to access through through CRA, sorry. And because of security, which we understand and respect, but advocates are not able to actually be a part of that, or housing support workers to be able to help somebody with that. All we can do is really coach, but they probably don't know where they've last lived. They probably don't know what their last option, tax assessment came in as. And we really need to be, I think, cognizant of that fact and do what we can to eliminate that barrier in affordable housing applications. I know NL Housing has certainly gone to great lengths to do that, and it is become a lot easier for us to be able to get those applications in as quickly as we need to. But we really need to consider that has to be eliminated, and do everything we can to work to do that with our with our partners, for sure.
Thanks, Joby. And I can speak a little bit to that on the city side. Certainly that is a barrier we recognize from accessing city-owned housing. It's a issue with our legislation with the Municipal Act, and they've been advocating to have that legislation changed, which would then permit us to collect that information without having to get the consumer to do so, to provide it. So it is something that we've been working towards as well. I did see there was a additional one in the Q&A. Sorry, it's not expanding for me. A need to address the gaps in how the provincial health and operating funding or support funding would work in different housing model arrangements and models, or rather a willingness to consider unique, I think that's it. Hold on. Unique models that push the edges of a current framework.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on that, Krista, because we're working with the city Community Housing Transformation Center on a collaborative grant through the city's Catalyst grants to explore co-housing models. And one of the things that I think that we recognize is like built infrastructure is there for an extended period of time, but the markets that influence them can be pretty dramatic. So we see this built infrastructure that had been built over the past 50 years that was designed for families, larger families, that now the need is for individuals and like 1 to 2 person homes. And we have these these regulations that we don't want to overhouse people, but we need to house people. So something that we're exploring right now is how could co-housing potentially be an option there? And something that Councillor Ravencroft referenced was that pilot with Connections for Seniors with the City of St. John's. And we were really fortunate to partner with NL Housing to offer a flexible and innovative stream for new proposals, new ideas. And so we were able to jointly fund some of the startup costs for that, because we recognize if we understand the startup costs for that, we could potentially leverage these existing built assets in more unique ways, more innovative ways, without compromising the ability to provide support. So you're trying to, in many days, it feels like, and I'm sure most folks will have felt this, like you feel like it's a square peg in a round hole. Like we've got this infrastructure, but we got to find new ways to utilize it. But I'm really optimistic that the collaboration between the city, between the province, between ourselves and the community is really coming together in a way that you can point to one initiative where through startup funding, through operating funding, through rents, we're finding newer and more innovative ways to provide that. And so that's something that we'll look to continue. So I just wanted to let people know that idea of co-housing, or that idea of alternative housing arrangements to fit within this existing built infrastructure, is something that is very top of mind for us. And we'll be looking to expand on that over the next year. So it's just to talk a bit about that point there.
Thanks, Doug. There's some other comments in here too. Housing must include neighborhood planning with access to recreation and leisure activities. And that's certainly been part of the new envisioned development regulations with the city as well, and thinking about how housing goes near transit corridors and looking at intensification zones. But also the city also did consultation on the healthy city strategy, which has a huge emphasis on this as well. I'm trying to see some of the other ones, some solutions, accessible provincial grants specific to inclusion and diversity, free training offered to landlords to provide an understanding, an overview of the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity in housing. I think that's really an important one. Like Doug mentioned, Home Connect has done some training around mental health and addictions as well. And we partnered recently to do landlord training around Indigenous cultural humility training. So that's another one we can add to the landlord education piece. We need to provide more education for landlords to address bias that can exclude others from housing. I don't know if I missed any. Any other thoughts, comments from any of our panelists or any other participants?
Just wanted to add as well that we were also very fortunate to receive the Catalyst funding last year, for this year, I should say, I guess. And we have undertaken a project to actually look at doing a survey with our consumers and with different organizations in terms of how accessible housing and how housing, the needs of people with disabilities kind of fit in there, and where we can kind of fit into the models along the way as well. So we're very excited, certainly in the coming year, to finish that and kind of look as a go forward of how we're going to proceed in housing, and to what levels that looks like, you know, and because the disability lens and the experience certainly is there with this organization and with the Disability Network to be able to kind of get into that field and offer, I think, a lot of support in that area as well. So we've tiptoed in there in terms of coordinated access and the housing support work that we've brought into the advocacy program, but we're certainly interested in looking further into how we can get into housing people with disabilities and providing that support on a cross disability with the disability lens as well. So just wanted to kind of put that out there, that's some of the work that we've undertaken as well.
Thanks, Joby. I'm eager to learn more about that project too. We're very happy to see it coming forward with the Catalyst grants. Not that one. Any other topics or sub-themes folks would like to learn more about when it comes to this? I know there's all sorts of sub-themes in terms of, you know, gender and immigration and Indigenous representation, those types of things. We're just really trying to think of potential future webinar topics, if there's anything anyone would like to see in the future or learn more about. We have another one. We need to make sure our policies are inclusive and make sure that events are fully accessible, such as the pedestrian mall. We'll certainly pass that along. I know that feedback has been received as well in some of the pedestrian mall consultation already. Housing for sex workers. Any others? All right, certainly. Thanks, everyone. You'll still have a link to the Jamboard. So if you think of something else, you want to throw it in there later, that's fine. That'll help inform us as we move forward and start planning future events. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I will, with pleasure, turn it over to Minister John Abbott, who I don't think needs much of an introduction, but he has quite the large portfolio. Minister of Children, Seniors and Social Development, Minister responsible for the status of persons with disabilities, Minister responsible for the community sector, and Minister responsible for the Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation. So all very relevant to our topics today. So I'll hand it over to you, Minister.
Thank you, Krista. I appreciate the introduction, and to everyone on the panel and for those participating. Certainly glad that I'm here today to listen and obviously learn through the piece. And the fact that this is National Housing Day and we're able to deliver on this webinar, I thought was great because it gives meaning to the theme. And the fact that we, in this particular webinar, focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion in housing, I was, especially glad that is today's focus, and it ties into our accessibility legislation, which Craig spoke about, which I will not go into any further because I think he did a great job, and I certainly appreciate that, Craig, for that, because it does represent a significant opportunity to really address not only housing but all aspects of our society and each of the economic and social sectors as we go forward. And the fact that we can start now developing standards, and hopefully we can accelerate those from what we've learned from other jurisdictions, and both across Canada and elsewhere. The Canadian Standards Association have reached in because they have a series of standards. Other provinces have standards. So I think we should be able to accelerate a lot of this over the next in the next couple of years. Certainly while I'm in this portfolio, I want to make sure we do just that. And I was very pleased, Minister, to be able to get that legislation passed the fall, and we'll be making a little do out of that come December 3rd for International Disabilities Day, as it were. So appreciate that. In terms of, and I'll speak a couple of things here. One is responsibility for the Newfoundland Labrador Housing Corporation. That's where our policy work is getting done. That's where our programming is getting developed, and that's where our funding is channeled through from the provincial government. Obviously, and Doug and others would know that we're not doing that in isolation, nor should we. We work closely with the federal government through the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation and some of the federal departments as needed. But more importantly, we're working with the municipalities in this part of the province, certainly with the City of St. John's, been very strong leaders in looking at social and housing and affordable housing, and working with various community agencies, many coordinated through the End Homelessness St. John's. But what I know from my life before, sort of involved in provincial politics, there are a lot of work done at the community level, recognizing there is need, there are opportunities, and there are solutions. And we here at the provincial level and through the provincial government got to be seen addressing those in a timely fashion and allocating resources. The federal minister of housing was here in St. John's last week. So I did get the opportunity sort of one-on-one and have a good conversation with him. He's very optimistic that there will be new federal funding going towards housing needs, housing solutions across the country. And he was very keen on some of the things that he's seen happening in this province and how we can build on that. So I think there will be a challenge for all of us probably in the very, very near future to make sure we can identify really creative solutions, meeting whatever terms and conditions the federal government might sort of put on that, but that we can come together very quickly to respond to any initiatives, new initiatives that they put forward. And I think he has some ideas. I think he knows his file quite well, given his own life circumstance. So he's going to be a strong advocate, and certainly wants to work with our community to advance the many solutions that are there. We have some immediate projects, I can use that term for the moment, that we have actually in front of the federal government now. Ideally, if they get funded, will help deal with some of the pressures here in the city, elsewhere across the province, and in Labrador, because the issues that we're facing are they're very similar across the country. They're very similar within the province. It's sometimes a matter of scale. And I think in the Northeast Avalon in particular, we are seeing a lot of the forces really come together in a very short period of time, and COVID has certainly exacerbated those. And we recognize that there are solutions that we can put in place very quickly. I like the Jamboard concept because it brought out a lot of very practical things that can be done. The work that Jody and Taylor addressed and their advocacy. Again, this is not rocket science we're talking about here, folks. This is very basic service provision for people who are vulnerable, who need our support. That's the community support, the government support. And I think what Jody put out there was very practical. And we need to work much more in line from the consumer perspective than the institutional perspective. And we've got to change that dialogue. And I'm more than happy to see that happen and force that to happen if need be, or whatever language we can put around it. And I'm seeing a real opportunity here with the Accord NL, because it's going to be a new window on the social determinants of health, which Sister Elizabeth Davis in particular has been talking a lot about. And I haven't seen anything yet in terms of exactly what the final report is going to look like. I've seen some of their presentations, but what's going to be important is that if we can, to the degree you can segment the housing piece there, and how then we can jump on that report very quickly and say, all right, we think we know what's meant here. We think we got some solutions. Now let's get people together very quickly to leverage that report, come to governments and elsewhere, but to say, look, if you're serious about what this report is about, well, here are some real good examples, and whether they're pilot, whatever word we want to put around it. Now, pilot is one example, but not necessarily, because I think we got to get past that. But that we really come together and put these plans in place very, very quickly. And I know in terms of one of the things that the Newfoundland Labrador Housing Corporation is looking at right now, and we're just sort of holding back a bit because we want to see what that Sister Elizabeth David's Accord NL pieces will look like, is that we have to do a housing and homelessness plan for the province. We will be building off that Accord NL of the things that are happening, the federal provincial agreements that are in place, and the ideas and examples that were put on the JAM board and elsewhere. We'll be obviously doing further consultation around this and bring that together as a provincial plan for the next 5 years. And part of it will be, what do we need to build? Where do we need to build it? But more importantly, which I think most of us recognize, is that where are the supports that are going to go with this quote unquote housing solutions? Because that is what is critical, both on the individual level and at the whatever sort of cohort you're looking at, with the persons with disabilities and the type of disabilities, what types of supports do they need, and how do we make sure that they fund that? And that's one of the things that the federal minister commented on. I was really glad to hear, because he said he recognized that we can build and build and build, but if we don't have the supports in place, this is not going to be successful in the terms that we know it needs to be. So that was music to my ears. So I'm very optimistic that we'll get some federal support in terms of dollars to do what we know we need to do right across the province. Right now, we are investing, a fair number of federal and provincial dollars in looking at our existing housing stock, how we can improve it, how we can make it, again, where we can make it accessible. As you can appreciate, some of those buildings are just, from a cost effectiveness, it's probably not worth doing what needs to be done. So we need to look at how do we, for those that can be, my words here, taken out of the housing stock and replaced with new accessible units from a physical accessibility, we're going to want to do that. We've just opened up some units there on Froud Avenue in St. John's. It's quite successful. Met with one of the families there. It's it's just ideal, but long overdue. To Craig's point around universal design, again, we've been talking about that forever. It needs to be a standard. So when I'm thinking of the accessibility standards, is that, that'd be the type of thing that we should be able to get agreement on and have a standard. So anybody building anything, modifying anything to the degree that it makes sense, that it'll be universal design, but more importantly, it will be done right. And I'm known examples where building owners have gone out, thought they've done the right thing, thought they put in the right ramp, thought they put in the right door, and find out within a week it's done wrong, and it has to be totally redone. You got to ask yourself where was whether it's the contractor or the engineer, whoever, do they really know what they need to be doing? So we need to raise the standard and the education and the accountability around those things. So that's something I'm certainly, and we can work with the different communities of interest around those things. But I think the accessibility plan act and planning process will allow us to get add all of that in a very systematic way. And there's a venue to do it, and that I think is going to be important. Again, if you look at our seniors, the issues for our seniors community, they're vulnerable. There's issues around affordability, and that's obviously a growing profile for us at the Newfoundland Labrador Housing Corporation. I get lots of calls. Can I get an accessible unit? Can I get something on the ground floor, et cetera, et cetera? And we're saying, we hear you, but we can't help you today. So one of the things we will have some flexibility going forward, but it's going to be, again, dependent on private landlords and others in the short term anyway, is that we are now funding for more rent subsidies, and we are making those portable. And so in a very short period of time, all our rent supplements will be portable right across the province. So we have the green light from cabinet to go that route, and the funding now to increase that those. So that will help in the short term. Again, I'm like to see the federal government obviously provide more funding to help us expand on that. The other part of that is that we will require our landlords to meet an inspection. Up till now, we've been sort of hands off. On a go-forward basis, we will, before you get rents up, it'll be subject to an inspection. So again, to raise the standard. There might be a little bit of a dance here with some of the landlords because it's change management, and people don't always change the way we think we'd like it happen. But we are engaging the landlords, and we will work with them. But at the end of the day, we need more housing right across the province. We've been talking to some contractors, social enterprises. There's lots of creativity out there. There's a lot of financing available. There's money available. So we've got to figure out how we can work with them to provide the right housing in the right place at the right price. And the more we can engage as many people in those discussions, I think the more successful we will be. And I think the Housing Corporation, as an example, needs to play more of a catalyst role, a facilitator role, an integrator role in that at a provincial level, and then working with different communities on their particular needs. So obviously working with in Homes of St. John's is going to be critical for us to succeed in this part of the province. So there's lots of opportunity, and I'm very sort of excited about what we can achieve because we do have the knowledge, we do have the skill set to move forward. We are, as I said, doing a lot of repairs. We got more money coming, so that will be helpful. And as I said, where we can modify our units to meet the immediate needs, we will do that. We work with, obviously, we're funding community centers throughout the province, again, working with the people who live in our housing units, but working with them in community. And I'd like to see us support that more. So we help individuals, particularly Indigenous folks, particularly those coming, really from Labrador, and St. John's has become a bit of a melting pot. We've got a lot of new immigrants, and we want to attract more, and the Premier is very keen on that. Well, and as the federal minister said to me, John, that's fine, but they need housing. And I said, agreed. So how do we get that housing in place as quickly as possible, and that it is a true welcoming experience for new immigrants? So a lot of work needs to happen there. And we've got to get the policy pieces right when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to making sure as said, not only equitable, that we also do this as fair as possible down the road. And we have to learn from the people who are reliant on the housing to meet their needs. Catherine was on a few minutes ago. We've had some good chats just recently about her experience, but how that translates for persons with disabilities and persons with, specifically people who are are confined to a wheelchair, and how their experience will differ from others, and what the challenges are to landlords, and how we support landlords in meeting those particular needs. So there's a lot there to happen. So for me is, how do we capture all of this on a go forward basis in some kind of planning document, not a static planning document, but the one that will be we'll just keep improving on as we learn more and take advantage of the opportunities. One of the just side comments I had with the federal minister, I asked him what's happening in terms of federal support for conversion of business, business towers. And we've got downtown St. John's now. We got lots of buildings that are truly vacant. Are there some opportunities there to work with those owners and landlords to modify those and to allow people to move in and to make our downtown more vibrant? So I think there's going to be a move across the country around those, again, as a potential opportunity. Now, who that serves is a good question, but that's an opportunity that hadn't been really thought about 2 years ago. Now it's a reality. And if anybody who's downtown St. John's and looks up, you'll see lights, but you're not seeing any workers anymore. So again, an opportunity, and I'd be more than happy to work with landlords there. We're working with the faith communities. We're working with others when there's opportunities. The Gathering Place is a good example. We're working with the Salvation Army, again, supporting their missions as they support vulnerable people in our community. And we just were able to support the opening of the new units down at the Hope Center, which will help with that particular part of our city and part of the population. So again, and the framework I want to look at here, and we're talking from the department and with the Housing Corporation and with the Department of Health and government overall, is sort of looking at this from a well-being. How do we support individuals living in the community in terms of their full need to live well? And housing obviously is probably, yes, you need income, but you need a place literally to call home, and that has to be the cornerstone of whatever we do going forward. So that's something I'm committed to doing. I know there's a lot of conversations, and I've certainly, as people think through this, but certainly as we, January 2022 comes upon us, I would certainly like us to re-engage and to build out on some of the things that were talked about here today, other things I know that Doug and his group are working on, and using quote unquote the Jamboard kind of approach is really just put that up there, working with the different agencies that are active in this, and certainly for people, the consumers, is what are we seeing as the immediate short-term, medium-term, and long-term priorities, and let's get those right. And they, to me, will form the the housing and homelessness plan that we're working on here at the province. So I think, Krista, I will leave it at that for the time being. I do again appreciate you folks taking the lead on this, and the timing couldn't be better as far as I'm concerned. So I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We did have one question in the chat for you with regards to subsidies. Will these include current subsidies or just new ones?
They will be on the go-forward basis. They will be all, but we'll be facing the in terms of inspections and those kinds of things.
Perfect. Thank you. Lots of great provincial initiatives, and certainly some things that I've been tuning into too. We've been looking at some of the immigration piece at the city as well, and the impact that's going to have on the housing sector locally. Certainly excited to hear about that, and the rent sub piece and the inspection to go along with that. We know that addressing property standards is a huge piece of our housing sector that needs to be addressed. So certainly thank you, Minister, for your time and giving us all that great information update. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters and partners for helping to make this event happen, and special shout out to Matt George from End Homelessness St. John's, who's been really doing all the tech side of things and keeping this running smoothly. So thanks, Matt. And certainly a big thank you to every one of you here for making the time in your busy schedules today to attend today's event. We were happy to hear from you and glad to see all your ideas in our jam board, certainly things that we'll take back and reflect on and see what we do next. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.